Amen. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Howard, and I'm one of the pastors here at Revision. I'm excited to be here today. How about you? All right. We're in the middle of a series called The Last Arrow, where we've been talking about how God says we can live fully and die fulfilled, how we can make every moment count for something bigger than ourselves and live the lives that He created us for. And over the last few weeks, we've talked about how there's a fight out in front of us if we want to bring love and light to all the hatred and darkness that permeate this shattered space surrounding us. But God's inviting us to step into that fight until our last arrow is gone. And we need courage to accept that invitation, but God promises us all the courage we need. And what we're going to do over the course of the next few weeks is talk about the characteristics of people who decide that they're going to live that kind of last arrow lifestyle. Like what it looks like when someone gives themselves and their lives to the things that really matter and chooses to rise above the status quo that's so easy to settle for. And one of the things that defines people who live like that is that they stand their ground. And at the end of the morning, this morning, I'm going to invite you to stand your ground, to make a decision to step into this moment and identify with the God who created you and accept from Him the future-generating life of significance that He wants to give to you. But first I want to clarify what I mean when I say stand your ground, because I think those words can be terribly and awfully misinterpreted. In fact, I know a whole lot of people who love that phrase, stand your ground, who are like the exact wrong people to love it. I bet you know some of them too. They're like people who are rigid and proud and self-centered and certain that they're a genius and everyone else is an idiot, and they're always standing their ground. They never fail. It's like everywhere they are is their ground. And for some of you, maybe names are popping into your head right now of parents or siblings or teachers, coaches, friends. There are certainly names popping into my head of people like that. I had a buddy in college who, like, thankfully he's grown a lot since then, but he was always ready for a fight. And one time we were playing in a charity softball tournament. And he got tangled up with a guy at second base, and they both fell over, and he felt like that guy had tagged him too hard, so he just wouldn't get off the guy, just laid there and pinned him to the ground. And some people for the other team ran in, and there was some shoving and shouting until they remembered this is a charity softball tournament. But when my buddy got back to the dugout, he was really mad at the rest of us for like not running out there to fight some people or something. And he sat down next to me and knew what I was going to say. She just looked at me and said, "Howard, don't tell me I need to get over it. Sometimes you got to stand your ground." And I told him, "You're right, man. Sometimes you do. It's just that I don't think second base of a municipal softball complex is ever going to be my ground." So we talk about standing your ground this morning. It's not that. It's not picking every fight possible because you love to fight or you love to be right. And it's not deciding that everyone who disagrees with you must be stupid and evil, because if they were smart and good, they would agree with you. It's not that. It's not fighting just for the sake of victory. And also, let's be honest, before we even start this morning, standing your ground is a really tough thing to do. It's a difficult task. We live in the middle of a culture driven by social media where we're almost bullied into keeping unpopular opinions to ourselves, even when they're about fairly insignificant things like restaurants that everyone loves that are supposed to be good but really aren't that good. They're just overrated. Raising Cane's, Culver's, In-N-Out. It just is. Sometimes it's hard to overcome that little voice inside all of us that's telling us, I disagree, but I'm just going to be really quiet about it. And so this morning, I'm actually going to give all of you a chance to stand. This isn't something we do every week. It's not like an every week at Revision thing. If this is your first week here, I don't make people stand every week. But this morning, I want to give you a chance to stand up for something, because there's this moment in Mark 3 where Jesus does that for a guy. If you have Bibles, you can crack them open to Mark chapter 3. It's right between Matthew and Luke. We're going to be there this morning. Also, you can follow along with the words on the screen. Or if you don't have a Bible or your kids don't, we got a bunch of them at the Next Steps table. We love it when they disappear, so please take one. But Mark 3, verse 1 tells us this. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them, and by them, Mark means the Pharisees and Sadducees, the super religious, powerful people of the day, some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Because these guys had made up this whole bunch of extra laws that said not only should you keep the Sabbath holy by resting, you shouldn't do anything on the Sabbath because doing stuff is not restful. So they're watching him. And Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Put yourself in that guy's shoes for just a second. How many of you would panic if God looked at you and said, stand up so everyone can look at you? Like, I don't know exactly who this guy was, but I know one thing, because we know about the culture of Judaism in the first century. This guy with the shriveled hand did not want to stand up so everyone could see him. People who were crippled and diseased and marginalized in that society tried to hang out in the margins. One thing's certain, when that guy walked into the synagogue that day, he was sitting in the shadows, probably hoping that maybe Jesus would see him, but nobody else would. And Jesus saw him and then yanked him out of his lonely obscurity and created a terrifying moment for him as he pulled him into the middle of the room and said, stand up in front of everyone. So here we go. If you're here today and you're a diehard, bleed black and gold Iowa Hawkeyes fan, I just want you to stand up in front of everyone. Right now, let's do it. Stand up in front of everyone. Look around you at the good people. Okay, now, if you're a diehard, not one of the bandwagon, because most of them are bandwagon, not one of the bandwagon only when they're good, but you're a diehard Iowa State Cyclones fan, go ahead and stand. I'm going to sit. I want to be clear about the ground upon which I stand. All right. Now I know, you can sit. Now I know not everyone in here is from Iowa, so maybe you got some other college teams, or some of you aren't even college fans at all. So how about this one? If you're a Green Bay Packers fan, go ahead and just stand up. Okay, take note. If you hate the Green Bay Packers and this picture makes you happy, stand. Stand up, right here. All right. Now, I know some of you don't even like sports, so it's not super fair. So we'll shift gears just for you. How about this one? If you're a Taylor Swift fan, if you can't get enough T-Swift, go ahead and stand. So I'm talking about, I'm proud of you guys. I'm proud of you for being willing to stand. That's about what I expected, but it's amazing the things we're willing to stand up for. Like seriously, we walk around all the time wearing T-shirts of our school or our team or our favorite band or these things that we identify with. And like every Sunday, if you turn on your TV, you will see grown adult men who have decided to strip off their shirt and paint their entire body and scream for hours. And those same guys are going to walk into an office as like an accountant on Monday. Like that's a totally normal thing to have just done. That happens in our society. But just imagine for a second God calling you out and asking you to stand up in front of everybody. That's what happened to this guy in Mark chapter 3. And one of the things I love about the Gospel of Mark is a little bit different than all the other stories, Matthew and Luke and John. Mark does not waste time on anything that isn't awesome. He skips over the genealogies and all the part. Mark doesn't even talk about Jesus being born. He's like, of course Jesus was born, but check out what happened 30 years later. It was awesome. And the theme of Mark's account of the life of Jesus, if you had to pick one, is this: go big and go public. Mark wants to make sure everybody who reads the story he wrote about the life of Jesus knows that Jesus did not come to make your life a little bit better. He came to turn your life completely upside down. The Jesus we read about in Mark is not a therapist, he's a revolutionary. Which is why, right from the first chapter of Mark, all these people want to kill him. The powerful people, the religious leaders, the folks who set up this whole system to keep the broken people and the dirty people and the sinful people out and create space for them to be good and feel self-righteous and kind of earn God's love and earn their way to heaven. It's why they hated him, because he came for the broken, messed up people. And that's why we read in Mark 3 that they were trying to trap him. They're trying to catch him doing something illegal. Because these guys had decided the only way to follow God's command and keep the Sabbath holy was to do absolutely nothing, not even do good, because doing good on the Sabbath would probably really offend God. So what made the Sabbath sacred then was just focusing on you. Don't worry about other people. Don't worry about whether they're suffering or anything like that. Just do you and get your soul right. That's what the Sabbath is all about. For what it's worth, there are a whole lot of religious people in the world today who still think and talk like that. Okay, so here they are. They're on the Sabbath. They're doing nothing other than plotting to kill Jesus, which apparently in their minds was not doing anything. And as soon as they realized that Jesus showed up at the synagogue, believe every single one of them are staring at that guy with the shriveled hand. Why? Because Because they knew who Jesus was. He had a reputation at this point, and they knew when he rolled into the synagogue where he was going. He wasn't going to the powerful people, and he wasn't going toward the prestigious people. He was going to head straight towards that guy sitting there broken and alone. They knew that's what Jesus would do because Jesus is so predictable. And he totally was. Even though he knew that it was against their made-up rules, even though he knew that they would hate him for it, even though he knew they would try to discredit him and eventually try to kill him for it. Jesus saw that man with the crippled hand, and he was going to heal it on the Sabbath. Because showing love and healing what's broken is the ground Jesus came to stand on. And people like that guy sitting alone and abandoned in the margins are the people Jesus came to fight for. Standing your ground is about recognizing and stepping into the moments and the places where somebody needs to do something. Because if everybody shrinks back in fear or everybody does nothing, brokenness and darkness will continue to prevail. Standing your ground is about recognizing who God is and who God says you were made to be, and then standing in the places where he's promised to meet you, even when it's difficult. When it comes to living a last arrow lifestyle, to taking hold of the life God says you were made for, here's the deal. If you're going to make your life count, you'll have to find some ground you're willing to fight for. Some place where you're willing to stop running and take a stand. There's going to have to come a time in your life where you quit striving to be what the world says that you should be and decide you're going to be who God says you were made to be. There's got to come a moment where you say, I will stand in bold relief against the backdrop of a hostile world that wants to keep broken people broken, hurting people hurting, lost people lost, lonely people alone, and people living in darkness from seeing the light. And make no mistake, that fight, that ground that you stand on, it'll never be an easy fight, and it'll never be easy ground to stand on. One of our heroes in the Bible is a guy who's not very famous. He doesn't show up very often, not in a lot of verses, but he's one of King David's mighty men. There's a group of warriors and generals who banded together with David who are known as the Gibborim, the brave ones. And one of the coolest things about the Gibborim is that they weren't drawn from like the elite special forces unit of the Israeli army. They actually became that, but they didn't start out there. It wasn't like a whole bunch of Navy SEALs in King Saul's army defected and they were like, I'm going to go over to David. And not one of the mighty men was born brave. The Bible actually tells us that this is a group of guys who were distressed, discontented, and in debt. And they showed up and banded together around David. You know what I love about that? I love that that's the description the Bible gives to the mighty men of David, because I know there are some of you sitting here right now as I talk about finding a place to stand your ground. Some of you have been sitting here this whole series, we talked about striking your last arrow and staying in the fight till the battle's over. And there's this voice inside you that's screaming, yeah, but not me. Like I know God made some people to be courageous, and God has big stuff and important stuff for some people to do, but how could I do that? Like I'm too messed up already. I'm too far gone. I'm too painfully ordinary to ever do anything for God. I hope somebody else does it in here, but not me. Remember, the mighty men of David came distressed, disconnected, discontented, and in debt. So if any of those describe you, I have great news. God has big plans for your life. He can use you just like he used them. Because it wasn't the courage they came with that changed the course of their future. It was the courage God developed in them as they walked toward him and they did life together. My favorite one of them is a guy named Shammah. Read a story about him in 2 Samuel 23, verses 11 and 12. He had this crazy moment in his life. It says, next to him was Shammah, son of Agi the Hararite. When the Philistines banded together at a place where there was a field full of lentils, Israel's troops fled from them. But Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field. He defended it and struck the Philistines down, and the Lord brought about a great victory. Just try to picture this moment for a minute. The Philistine army standing there at the edge of a field, just full of beans, ready to be harvested. And on the other side of the field is the Israelite army. Just absolutely filled with fear by the size of the army that's coming after them, both in numbers and in stature. The Philistines are a warrior clan. These are the people of Goliath. And as the Israelites look at them, their hearts just well up with fear. Instead of living into the task they'd been assigned, which is to defend the harvest, they tuck tail and run, which isn't really solving anything because the fight's coming eventually anyway. The Philistines are still going to come. It's just delaying the inevitable. They either have to fight or become slaves, but they're filled up with fear, and so they run. Everyone except Shammah. And there he stands in the middle of the field, a man between two armies. One just thirsty for blood, and the other hastily retreating in fear. We have no idea what made Shammah stop. We don't know whether he begged the rest of the army to stay with him. We can guess that the Philistines were pretty pumped when they saw everyone running. It could be great to walk into a battle and know that the battle was over before it even began. They're probably cheering, having a great time, really excited until this one guy walked out into the middle of the field and stood there and drew his sword. Like, what would be going through your mind if you're one of the Philistines looking at that guy? He's a madman. They probably sent out one guy first, their champion. That's how it worked back in the day. You send out your best warrior, you're like, go kill the crazy man. And after Shammah struck down the champion, they sent out a few more of their best fighters. As they watched them get killed in the field of lentils, they rushed him all together until all those who'd lost their taste for blood turned around and ran away while Shammah stood his ground in that field. And why that field? We don't know. We don't know. All we know is that Shammah had what I like to call a Popeye moment. I don't know how many of you have ever watched that cartoon. I grew up watching it at my grandma's house. And Popeye, he was kind of a calm dude until someone messed with his lady. And when olive oil was in trouble, he would get to the point where he said this. He'd say, "That's all I can stand. I can't stand no more." Then he would pop some spinach and his muscles would get big and he would fight anybody who was between him and olive oil. And I just love that line. It's all I can stand. I can't stand no more. Like Shammah's standing there at the edge of this field. And then the harvest that's there is a promise. Not just of food, but of a future. And it's a food and a future that the Philistines came there to rob. And he had a Popeye moment. He said, "That's all I can stand. I can't stand it no more." That's it. This is food and a future. Not just for me, for my family, for my wife and my kids and my people and my nation. Here I will make my stand. I think it's so cool that it was like in a field full of beans that were ready to be harvested. Because I think like we love to stand in the middle of the harvest. Most of us don't mind doing things for God in the bounty and in the blessing when things are really easy. But we have an enemy that will turn the harvest field into a battlefield, and then what? Will we stay or will we run? There's always a choice to be made at the crossroads of courage and compromise. And the truth is, when the enemy takes our harvest fields and turns them into battlefields, there is nobody who would blame us for bailing on that. Like nobody would have blamed Shammah for running. Not one soul, because that's what everybody else did. He would have just been simply joining a legion of cowards who could have banded together later and told the story to everyone around him about why they had to run, because there really wasn't another option. The odds were impossible. But he didn't. And the real inconvenient thing about that, the huge problem with jerks like Shammah, is that they wreck the narrative for the rest of us. Like one person deciding to live a heroic life and take a stand completely rips away our ability to convince ourselves or anybody else that we had to settle because it wasn't possible to do anything else. And the crazy thing about Shammah is even if he had died out there in the field of lentils, he'd raised the bar so high that none of the people who ran could ever sit around a campfire talking about why everybody had to run that day because there wasn't another option. Because while they talked about that, eventually some little kid would have come up and said, but where's Shema? Shema didn't run, I think, because he realized there's no point in running if when you get where you're going, there's no life to be found there. Like if sacrificing the life you were made for so you can live a lesser life is the only option, maybe that's not worth running toward. I think so often we avoid situations where the odds seem bad. I do. I know I do. I do it all the time. I just want God to change the odds or call me somewhere else. Like, yeah, that fight doesn't seem like one I could win. Give me a different one, please. Because we're scared. And fear is a bully. It beats us down and it holds us back and it dominates our thoughts and our choices so much that I wonder sometimes if for a lot of us, where we are and who we've become is more a product of what we're running away from than what we're walking toward. I think we know it. I'm just convinced of this. Retreat is the space where regret festers. As we look back at our lives, at the things maybe we could have done for God, maybe we would have done differently, those moments where we wish we just would have lived for a minute with insane courage, the memories we have where we most desperately wish for a time machine, are those places where regret is festering deep in our souls because we retreated when we were born to stand. But God's inviting us to something better and something more. To find a place and a cause where we decide this is worth fighting for. Here I stand my ground. And he's inviting us to trust that he will meet us there because bad odds make for big miracles. We'll say that again. He will meet us there because bad odds make for big miracles. They did for Shema. They can for you. So the question is like, what's your field of lentils? Where's God tugging at your heart? Where's he asking you to take a stand and fight to help heal up something that's not right in this world? Shema is a guy who's not a household name. There are a whole lot of us in here who probably had never even heard his name before this morning. And in the grand scheme of the world, like beans are really delicious, but most of us wouldn't die for them. But Shema had this moment where God tugged at his heart and said, no, it's not okay for the Philistines to rob our food and our future anymore. This is the field where I want you to stand. And he stepped into it. And I'm convinced that like when he made his way back to the rest of the army, he showed up covered in the blood of his enemies. There wasn't a single word that needed to be said because everybody knew. Everybody knew who won the fight, and they knew that God had done through one what he wanted to do through many, because that one was willing to stand. And here's the crazy, beautiful thing, the history of the church, like for the last 2,000 years. Of all these people who've had their eternity rewritten as they crashed into Jesus by meeting his people, of all the things that have been set right by a church just on fire for what God wants done in the world, the beauty of the last 2,000 years is this. That history and that story is built on ordinary people who are not household names, who nobody remembers. Ordinary people who stood in the ordinary fields God called them to. So what's your field? And we fight for it. Like, what if you don't? I promise you this is true. I know it's true because it's a direct quote from our tall, wise youth pastor, Jeff Reining. He wrote it on the whiteboard in our office, and he quoted himself, so that's how I know he made it up, and it's good. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Jeff Reining. So true. And that was my thinking in 4th grade at Windsor Elementary, just up the road on University, when I decided to stand my ground. There was a 5th grader, he was a bully. Cheated at Foursquare, called people names, pushed people around all the time, acted like a jerk. And one time he got out in Foursquare and he wouldn't move, and this girl told him she was going to tell a teacher. So he called her an awful name and then got out, and he walked to the line yelling, whatever, you're all wimps. I'll do what I want. No one's going to touch me. Ain't nobody going to touch me. And I was like, I've had it with this guy. Today I stand my ground, and I elbowed him right in the stomach, and he keeled over. And then he stood up and punched me straight in the mouth. And he was ready to fight, and I just looked at him. I said, listen, sorry I elbowed you. I shouldn't have done that. But you got to quit being a bully. It's not cool, man. And he was so confused. He looked at me for about 10 seconds, and he said, sorry. I'm sorry I punched you in the mouth. And then we shook hands. And that was the day that kid stopped being a bully. And we actually became really good friends after that. And that would be such a cool ending to the story, except for some little turd told the teachers that we got in a fight. So we're coming in from recess. And we were cool, but then the teacher's like, you got in a fight. Your lip's bleeding all over the place. Darn it. So we had to go see the principal. So anyways, maybe not the best example. Don't do it. Like maybe the moral of the story is, when you choose to stand your ground, don't be a jerkbag about it like 4th grade Mike. But do be bold, no matter what the cost is, like Shema, and like Jesus. Like Jesus healed this dude with the shriveled hand. He asked him, even though he did not want to be the center of attention, to stand up in front of everybody. He was like, hey man, I'm about to do something really cool. I got something big to do, but I'm gonna need you to stand up first. And I read that and I think, how many times is God waiting to do something big and something cool in and through our lives if we will just stand up? Like, how often does that happen? How many spaces are we in where he's just inviting us to stand so we can move? Maybe that's why you're in the job that you hate. Maybe that's why you're working with all those people who drain you. Maybe it's why you're sitting in that class or at that school you wish you could escape from. It's why you're dealing with those difficult neighbors. And when that stuff happens in my life, I think my general reaction is to just like shake my fist at God and be like, why are you punishing me? But maybe he's not punishing you. Maybe he's posturing you. He's getting you into the exact space he needs you so that he can draw people to himself through your life. And if you'll just stand, he'll meet you there. This thing I've realized about people is that sometimes they need to see God through other people. God reveals himself in all kinds of ways. He reveals himself through creation. You can go out and see trees and mountains and a sunset, and it just points to the beauty of the Creator. But I don't think very often people look at a sublime sunset and say, oh, look at the purple and the orange and the red. I think God can change my life. I just don't think, it's just not a natural way of thinking. But people look at us and our failure and our brokenness, and they say, well, if God could do that for him, if God could do that for her, maybe me too. Like all the people in the synagogue out there were literally looking at God as they looked at Jesus, but they needed to see him through the lens of that guy with a shriveled hand so that when they went back home and looked in the mirror, at their own brokenness, at their own failures, at their own problems, they could realize, hey, if Jesus changed him, if Jesus saw him, if Jesus healed him, maybe me too. I think we get so caught up sometimes as Christians in the church trying to act like we've got it all together, believing that God can't really accomplish anything meaningful through our lives until we've achieved some like higher spiritual plane. And we're like, yeah, I'll stand my ground once I've perfected myself. I'll step into the fight once I've figured it all out and got it all right. But the truth is, your wounds and your scars are the evidence for the people around you that God can fix a broken life. So stand up and be honest and be vulnerable and stop faking it. Because people can only see how God made you whole if they know that you've been shattered. Like, what a tragedy if God changed your life and nobody ever noticed. So Jesus made sure people saw when he healed that guy with the crippled hand. Because he was going to do something in that guy's life, but also through that guy's life. He was going to use that guy to show everybody else who was watching how huge his love was. And the religious leaders, all these guys with the power and the authority, were seething as they watched him do it. Jesus knew they were mad, so he looked right at them. In Mark 3, verse 4, he said this: which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save a life or to kill? But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out and his hand was completely restored. And then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. It's just a crazy moment to me. Jesus asks these guys a really simple question. He's like, on the Sabbath, is it okay to do good or do evil? To save somebody's life or kill somebody's life? And it's a rhetorical question. It should have been easy to answer, but they were silent for a reason. Because Jesus had changed their categories. Their whole frame of reference for the Sabbath was that you shouldn't do anything at all ever. And so doing good or doing evil, killing a life or saving a life, that was all doing stuff. And they didn't do anything on the Sabbath, which is why they couldn't answer Jesus' question. And here's what blows my mind as I think about that through the lens of like living a last arrow lifestyle, walking out into our week and deciding what ground we're going to stand on this week. I think for most of us, as we go to the places we're going to go tomorrow, we're going to find ourselves in the exact same space the Pharisees were in as they stared at that guy with a shriveled hand on the Sabbath. The choice is going to be set before us tomorrow when we go to work or school, when we walk into the restaurants and the stores that we go to isn't going to be good versus evil. Most of us aren't gonna wake up tomorrow morning and be like, should I do good today or do something horrifically awful? Like maybe give a compliment, maybe stab someone in the neck. That's just not going through most of our minds. Some of us maybe. If this is you, talk to me after, please. But like for most of us, that's not where we're gonna be tomorrow. The choice isn't gonna be good or evil. It's gonna be good or nothing. Our problem isn't blatant sin, it's latent faith. Refusing to take a stand isn't actively doing evil, it's just willingly doing nothing in a moment that's crying out for somebody to do something. So I think the big question for you this morning is, will you do good or be good for nothing? Will you allow fear to hold you back and send you running, or will you lean into the places where God is tugging at you? Will you step into the moment he's placed in front of you? Will you look out at a shattered world and let him break your heart for some stuff and have a Popeye moment and say, that's all I can stand. I can't stand no more. I will stand my ground here. Will you find your field of lentils this week and walk into the middle of it and draw your sword? I think if you won't, if you don't, like if you choose to do nothing instead of doing good, if that's what we all choose, if we keep living safe and scared, then our lives will end up being the product of what we're running away from rather than what God's inviting us toward. And we'll miss out on the beauty of being a part of the fight and the battle God is in for the heart of this city. And the people around us will miss out on the church being what God created it to be. But if we'll do it, if we'll find the fields that God's calling us to stand in, if we'll stand up, shriveled hand and all, as an example to the world of how God heals brokenness and makes us whole, if we'll choose to stand our ground individually and collectively, God will meet us on the ground where the good prevails. And he will work not just in our lives, but through our lives to draw a hurting world toward himself and rewrite eternity for people. I think that's ground worth standing on and fighting for. Will you guys pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for the blessing of purpose. Thank you for the blessing of the battle. Thank you for giving us ground that we can stand on. And thank you for the way you've used ordinary nobodies like us, discontented, distressed, in debt, and given us courage, filled us up with your Holy Spirit, and made us difference makers, even if no one remembers our name. Thank you for the chance that we have to crash into people every single day and rewrite eternity for them. God, we just pray that you'd fill us up with the courage we need this week, not to run in fear and hide and pretend that was our only option, but to stand in the places you've asked us to stand and trust that you will meet us there, because small odds make for big miracles. Fill us up with courage this week. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.